Well, wouldn't it be good if this embrace could lead to the creation of living beings? That is where Eros came in. Surreptitiously, he breathed that mysterious urge into Uranus that is called desire, and Uranus gave into it. He came together with Gaia, and they made love. Not just once, but 100 times. Not just for a day, but for 1,000 days. And soon a swarm of children were born. The first 12 would be called the Titans. 6 male Titans and 6 female Titanides. They were followed by the Cyclops, who got their name from the single eye they had in the middle of their forehead. After that came the Hecatoncheires, whose name means the 100-handed ones. And as if 100 hands weren't enough, each of them also had 50 fire-spitting heads. Finally, Gaia gave birth to the Giants, a fearsome race of colossal, monstrous-looking beings. There was only one problem. All of these children were unable to move. They were forced to remain inside their mother, imprisoned in the very place in which they were conceived. The reason was that Uranus, the sky, was literally pressed up against the Earth, Gaia. Between them, there was no space at all for their offspring to emerge into the light, to have an independent existence of their own. As soon as they tried to get out, their father, Uranus, would brutally shove them back inside. So, filled with rage and frustration, the Titans took it out on their mother. They fought, they thrashed about inside of her, they suffocated and tormented her. Gaia was suffering. She was worn out as well as furious. Things could not go on this way. Enough was enough. Gaia decided to rebel, and she ordered her children to turn against their father. No one moved. No one except the youngest of the Titans, Cronus. Cronus agreed to attack his father with the help of his mother. Unbeknownst to Uranus, Gaia secretly made a sickle out of flint and gave it to her son. All he had to do was wait for the right moment. And that moment wasn't long in coming. The ever-ardent Uranus came to make love to Gaia. As soon as he penetrated her, Cronus grabbed his father's genitals in his left hand, and with the sickle cut them off and tossed them into the sea. Overcome with pain, Uranus pulled back violently and moved away from Gaia. It was the moment they were waiting for. The two were separated at last. From then on, Uranus, the sky, remained in his place high up above the world, never to move again. The Titans, the Cyclops, the Giants were finally free to leave their mother's womb. It's said that the drops of rain that fall from heaven are in fact the tears of Uranus, tears of sorrow, tears of remorse, tears of nostalgia. When Uranus vanquished, Cronus became the ruler. Soon afterwards, he married his sister Rhea. One might have thought that this would lead to a reign of peace, but it is well known that once they take power, rulers are loath to relinquish it. Having been warned by Gaia that one of his sons would steal his throne one day, Cronus devoured each of his children alive as soon as Rhea gave birth to them. In despair, the unlucky goddess had no other choice but to try to escape from her husband's murderous frenzy. When she became pregnant again, she decided to run away. It was a wise decision, since the unborn child was a special child who wasn't quite like the others. It was Zeus, and she would not have him put to death. So Rhea ran away. She came to an island by the name of Crete, where, in great secrecy, she gave birth to the child. After she had entrusted her baby to the nymphs, the deities who personify the vital forces of nature, Rhea went back to Cronus. Cronus knew that his wife had been pregnant, and he was expecting her to give him the newborn child. But Rhea had planned everything out. Instead of the newborn baby, she gave Cronus a stone. A stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. This was apparently enough to fool the voracious Titan, who immediately devoured it. How could he have known that one of his sons up in Mount Ida in faraway Crete would return to avenge his mother, to free his brothers, to strip him of his honors, and reign in his place over the immortals? Zeus grew up in the mountains of Crete under the watchful eye of his grandmother, Gaia, the Mother Earth, and the nymphs. He was fed on nectar and ambrosia, which was brought to him by the doves and the eagles. He savored the delicate honeycombs that the bees made for him alone. And he suckled the milk of the goat nymph Amalthea. Later, after he had become master of the universe, Zeus would show his gratitude to these nurses and guardians. Amalthea would be raised up into the heavens to become the constellation Capricorn. He would take one of her horns and give it to the nymphs who had cared for him, turning it into the famous cornucopia, the horn of plenty, that is always filled with what its possessor desires to eat and drink. Meanwhile, little Zeus was in danger. Cronus had found out that his wife had tricked him. He set out to search for the son who had got away from his bloodthirsty clutches. He knew that his throne was at stake. Cronus looked everywhere. He lifted up the mountains and hills. He scanned the seas, but failed to find the child. And for good reason. The cradle containing the infant Zeus was in a cave up on Mount Ida, and some rather curious creatures were posted at its entrance. Who were they? The Curites. The Curites were a group of boisterous demons whose orders were to perform war dances, which consisted of striking their spears and shields together in order to keep the cries of the young god from reaching his father's ears. Time went by. Zeus grew up. He had learned about Cronus's gruesome deeds from his mother, and as he grew older, he thought more and more about taking revenge on his unworthy father. Zeus was now an adult. He met an Oceanid named Metis, a sea nymph, who was the daughter of the Titans Oceanus and Tethys. Metis was the goddess of wisdom and prudence, as well as the goddess of cunning. The young Zeus set out to seduce her, and he succeeded without any trouble at all. He then told her about his birth, his desire to avenge the crimes committed by his father, and his wish to free his brothers and sisters trapped inside Cronus's belly. How should he go about it? Metis came up with a solution. Give Cronus an emetic potion to drink that will cause him to vomit. To hide the taste, she added, mix it with honey. Excellent idea, but where can I find such a potion? Metis smiled. Why don't you ask your mother? She'll know. Zeus took the goddess's advice and went to see Rhea. He told her about the plan. Rhea approved of the scheme. She made the potion and gave it to her son, after arranging for him to enter Cronos' court as a cupbearer, the boy responsible for serving drinks to the gods. As soon as he got the chance to approach his father, Zeus offered him the cup. The unsuspecting Cronus took it and drank. The potion went to work at once, and he vomited up the stone in swaddling clothes. Then, one by one, he regurgitated all of the children that Rhea had brought into the world. Cronus was furious at having been duped, and determined to keep his throne, he decided to make his son pay for his rules. He rallied all of his brothers and sisters, the Titans, around him. In the meantime, Rhea's children naturally sided with Zeus up on Mount Olympus. 6 Olympians against 12 Titans. Thus began the great and terrible war. It would be known as the Titanomachy and would last for hundreds of years. At one point, when the outcome of the struggle seemed uncertain, Gaia, the tenebrous yet luminous grandmother, who could be silent as well as loquacious, told Zeus that in order to win, he would have to seek the support of allies from the same generation as the Titans, the Cyclops. The Cyclops were primordial deities. That is, they still had within them all of the brutality, all of the violence inherent in the earliest beings. In addition, Gaia explained, the Cyclops would also give Zeus the greatest of weapons, the weapons of thunder and lightning. At the present time, however, they were shut up in the realm of Tartarus, the most remote and the most abysmal region of the underworld. That was where Cronus had imprisoned them. If Zeus were able to free them, they would join forces with him. Zeus agreed. He released them, and with the support of the one-eyed monsters, he soon defeated the Titans. Had peace finally arrived? No. Because even though she had helped her grandson come to power, Gaia was now angry at him for forever banishing her own children, the Titans. So, against Zeus, she pitted the giants, the enormous race of creatures who were considered to be invincible. And thus a new war broke out. A new war called, this time, the Gigantomachy, which would continue long after the first mortals had come into the world. Zeus gathered his brothers, his sisters, and his children around him, and they fought back. The battles were fierce. Zeus managed to prevent the giants from getting their hands on the magic herb, a plant that was said to protect them from death. But even that did not stop Gaia. She refused to give in. Knowing that he could not defeat the giants without the help of a mortal, Zeus came up with an idea. He found his way into the bed of the daughter of the king of Mycenae, Alcmene, who gave birth to a being of extraordinary strength, Heracles. Every giant that was wounded by Zeus was then killed with an arrow by Heracles. Once again, Zeus triumphed over his enemies. And as if to mark this victory with a tangible memento, he would have the big stone that Cronus had swallowed in his place and then regurgitated, placed in Delphi. This was the Omphalos, the navel of the world, the center of the universe. And it is still there today. One might have thought that things would now settle down, but this was not to be the case. Zeus had one more obstacle to overcome. The last, but certainly not the least. For Gaia, once again, was enraged at the fate to which Zeus had doomed her offspring, the Titans. So she conceived a child with Tartarus, the most remote and the most abysmal region in the underworld. From this union would be born the most fiendish creature of them all, Typhon. Typhon was half beast and half man. The top of his head brushed the stars. His arms went stretched out, extended from the east on one side to the west on the other. Fire burned in his eyes. Serpents were coiled around his lower limbs. And as if his appearance alone was not enough to leave his enemies petrified in fear, Typhon also made the most horrendous noises when he moved, which resembled the bellowing of a bull combined with the roar of a lion. When this monstrous creature set out for Olympus, the panic-stricken gods fled to Egypt, where they disguised themselves by taking on the forms of animals. Apollo became a hawk, Hermes an ibis, Ares a fish, Dionysus a goat, Hephaestus an ox. Only Zeus stayed behind to fight the monster. This flight into Egypt would have unexpected results. It would lead to a mingling of the Greek and Egyptian deities. Typhon would be identified with Seth, the brother and enemy of Osiris. Zeus would be equated with Horus. Dionysus would become Osiris. Demeter, Isis, and so forth. It was an extraordinary intermixing of two cultures that were not necessarily destined to come together. But let us return to our hero and the battle he was waging against Typhon. It was brief, but decisive. While Typhon was going after Zeus across the sea in Sicily, Zeus tore up Mount Etna and threw it on top of his enemy. With Typhon buried at last under Etna, Zeus could finally proclaim himself the indisputable ruler. He was now, without contest, the master of the gods. It was now time to divide up the cosmos. Zeus set himself up as the supreme ruler and chose as his residence the realm of the sky. Poseidon, his older brother, was promoted to Lord of the Seas. His other brother, Hades, was given the keys to the underworld with the power to reign over the forces of darkness. The end result was a universe that was now structured and stratified. At the top was the organizing power of the world that was born out of chaos. Everything that had once been a part of the sky had been driven out, either imprisoned in Tartarus or sent down to earth to be among the mortals. An omnipotent God had been born, but this God did not impose any kind of creed, had no need for any kind of clergy. Zeus, who would henceforth rule the world, had a difficult task ahead of him. He would have to establish order without falling into despotism. Zeus is the almighty ruler of the world. He has vanquished all, even the most fearsome of his opponents. He has avenged his mother and won all the wars. He reigns supreme over both the mortals and the gods of the pantheon. There are 12 of them in his grand council, 12 gods and goddesses, the great Olympians. But after battling his way to the top, Zeus found himself presiding over a universe that had been turned upside down and torn apart. He thus had to remodel the world, as it were, to establish a more harmonious, a more measured form of governance. But can power be exercised without that passion that consumed the heart as well as the body? The truth of the matter is that Zeus liked to seduce. It was in fact through his many wives and mistresses that he would strengthen his own power. Zeus would acquire the assets of each of his conquests. Those who were to know him as rain, as a bull, or as a swan, would give birth to a race of demigods and heroes whose names would become the names of almost every region in the world. Zeus's amorous adventures were thus more than just romances. It was through his love interests that the master of Olympus indirectly imposed his authority, an authority that was based on the institution of laws and norms that had to be obeyed. Any transgression was severely punished. So in a certain way, Zeus combined love with order. First, there was Metis. Metis was a beautiful sea nymph. She represented prudence and wisdom, as well as cunning. In the primordial time, when the world was in gestation, her precious advice had enabled Zeus to avenge his mother and to rescue his brothers and sisters. So did the master of Olympus then propose to her out of gratitude? Gratefulness is not a strong point among those in power. No, Zeus was attracted to Metis. He was even very attracted to her. And as for Metis, how could she refuse? It was the king of the gods who was asking for her hand. The young nymph was flattered. She felt very honored. She said yes. and so they were wed. Their post-nuptial bliss knew no bounds until one day an oracle revealed to Zeus that after giving him a daughter, his wife would bear him a son, and that the boy would later dethrone him, as he himself had dethroned his own father, Cronus. We can imagine how disturbed the divine ruler felt. And so, in order to keep such a scenario from happening again, when Metis told him she was pregnant, Zeus challenged her to what was, to say the very least, a rather unusual contest. He dared her to outdo him by turning herself into different creatures. This game of metamorphosis is commonly played among the gods who have the power to change themselves into whatever they choose. Metis, though she was the symbol of prudence, threw caution to the winds. She blithely went through a series of metamorphoses, turning herself into a lioness, and then a wild boar, a flame, and even a fly. Zeus congratulated her. Very good, but can you make yourself into something even smaller? Metis was caught up in the game and changed herself once again, this time into a drop of water. Zeus applauded, and then immediately swallowed it. But one does not swallow the goddess of cunning without getting into big trouble. After a while, Zeus was seized by a raging headache that was so violent that he felt like his head was about to explode. His son, Hephaestus, the god of blacksmiths, ran up in a panic and with his great mallet struck his father's head, splitting it open. And a miracle happened. The daughter that Metis had been carrying leapt out of the head of the king of the gods. Her name was Athena. Athena, the goddess of war, protector of the city. She emerged in all of her splendor with her helmet and her spear, ready for battle. Rhea, Zeus's mother, became aware of her son's lustful tendencies. She sensed that his romantic and sexual volatility would lead to disastrous consequences. So she forbade him to remarry. She forbade him? How dare she? Had she forgotten that she was speaking to the master of the universe? Zeus took offense and threatened to rape his progenitress then and there. Rhea was unimpressed. She changed herself into a serpent, ready to pounce on her son. Zeus did the same thing. He turned himself into a male serpent and, entwining his mother in an indissoluble knot, carried out his threat. With his mother out of the way, Zeus did not waste any time in choosing a new wife. And he did not choose just anyone. Through Metis, Zeus had acquired cunning and prudence. What he lacked was a sense of equity, a sense of justice. He therefore set his heart on the venerable Themis, a Titanide. Themis was the goddess of justice. She and Zeus would have 15 children together. To begin with, there were 3 lovely daughters, the Hours, 3 maidens who would oversee the regularity of the seasons. After that, they had 3 more girls, 3 more daughters who lived somewhere in an impenetrable cavern near Olympus. 3 beautiful women with vacant eyes. They went everywhere together, connected by a thread, and they took on the appearance of simple spinners. At the mention of their names, mortals as well as gods trembled. Clotho, who spun the thread. Lachesis, who determined the length of the thread, and Atropos, the merciless Atropos, who cut the thread. That thread is, of course, the thread of life. It measured out the lives of mortals as well as the lives of the gods. The three maidens were called the Morai by the Greeks, and later on the Parcae by the Romans. Their decrees were absolute. Nobody had the power to change anything at all. Zeus himself acknowledged their superiority and never dared to challenge them. The Moirai were the three fates. It wasn't long, however, before Zeus repudiated Themis, although he kept her by his side as a sort of counselor. So far, his love affairs had given him prudence, cunning, and justice. But what is a king without a queen? It was time to choose a queen. She would come from his own family, and since incest was quite common in the world of the gods, Zeus's third wife would be none other than his sister, the goddess Hera, who was violent and irascible, and very jealous. Brother and sister would be wed in secret on the island of Samos. In fact, with Hera, Zeus got caught at his own game. For Hera at first spurned his advances. Zeus tried to seduce her in vain. After several failed attempts, he appeared to her in the guise of a young bird that had fallen from its nest and was shivering with cold. Moved by the sight, Hera picked it up and held it against her in order to warm it up. At that point, Zeus changed back into himself and tried to ravish her. Not one to get flustered, Hera decided that she would give in to him, but only if he promised to marry her. Zeus, unable to contain his desire, agreed, and the beautiful goddess would lose no time in reminding him of his vow. Hera, it must be said, had many assets. Her beauty may have been a bit severe, but she took pride in her appearance and was known as the goddess of the white arms. She was irresistible. His marriage to Hera, which in a way had been forced upon him, and the beauty of his wife, did not stop Zeus from pursuing his amorous affairs, which he did with a very precise aim in mind. As the master of the universe, he was seeking to strengthen his connection with the different elements in nature. For example, with water and the seas. Where had he met Eurydice, the oldest daughter of Oceanus? Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Like the others, she succumbed to his charms. She would give him 3 children, the famous Graces, the 3 Graces who personify the joy of life, deemed to be a gift from the gods. Later, Zeus would spend not less than 9 nights with another Titanide, the beautiful Nemesis, or Memory, who would give him 9 daughters, the Muses. The Muses represented the arts, and each muse had her own special gift: eloquence, history, poetry, music, etc. The Muses divided their time between Mount Olympus, where they entertained the gods with their talents, and Mount Helicon, where it was said there was a spring that was a source of poetic inspiration. the gods, there was one goddess whose beauty was unsurpassable as well as mysterious. She was the goddess of the night, Leto. Zeus desired her. He had desired her for a long time, and he wanted a boy, a beautiful boy, who would be the god of the light of the sun, the god of music and of poetry. He would get this child from the goddess of the night. Had he forgotten Hera, his wife, who was as vengeful as she was jealous? Leto was a mistress that Zeus regularly honored with his favors. She soon became pregnant with twins, but the Queen of Olympus, exasperated by her husband's latest escapade, sent Python, a monstrous serpent who rose out of the depths of the earth, to pursue poor Leto. Hera also decreed that Leto should never find rest in any land on which the sun shone. The unfortunate goddess was forced to wander endlessly all over Greece until she finally came, when she was already in the throes of labor, to a small island in the Aegean Sea that agreed to give her asylum. She gave birth to a girl, Artemis, and to a boy, Apollo. But Zeus's wandering eye did not only fall upon goddesses. Women, mortal women, also stirred the heart of the god of the gods. And that posed more than one problem. First of all, because it is not in the order of things for gods and mortals to mix. And secondly, because a mere mortal cannot look upon the divine glory of a god. But Zeus had fallen passionately in love with one woman on earth, one woman in particular. She was the daughter of the king of Thebes. Her name was Semele. In order to woo her, Zeus had no choice but to appear to her in the guise of a handsome prince. This was the only way that a god could be viewed by the human eye. The problem was that our divine philanderer was still married to Hera, and she furiously disapproved of this new romance that was developing between her husband and Semele. Hera had no intention whatsoever of turning a blind eye. She took on the appearance of Semele's old nurse, an elderly woman whom Semele loved and trusted, and went to see her. Semele, who was already pregnant, was about to give birth. This man who claims to be Zeus, the old nurse said to her, "Are you sure he's not an impostor? Then tell him to show you who he really is. If your lover is indeed Zeus, ask him to prove it to you. Let him reveal himself to you in all of his splendor, just as he appears to the other gods." These words did not fail to strike a chord with Semele. She began to doubt. This man, her lover, could it really be Zeus? The next time he came to see her, she begged him to show himself to her, as he really was. Zeus refused. He knew only too well what the consequences would be. Semele insisted. Zeus stood his ground. "If that's the way it is," Semele threatened him, "you will no longer be allowed in my bed." Mad with desire for Semele, Zeus capitulated. As his lover looked on in awe and astonishment, he revealed himself to her as he really was. In the eyes of mortals, he was thunder and lightning. The entire palace went up in a blaze, and along with it, poor Semele. She had just enough time to give birth to her child before she was consumed by the flames. Miraculously, the fire spared her child. It was a boy. Zeus took the infant with him. He would be called Dionysus. Clearly, Zeus could not sleep with mortals without employing incredible stratagems. At times, he became an eagle, at other times, a goose, or even a shower of gold, varying his many amorous metamorphoses just for the pleasure of it. On seeing an exquisite young woman playing on the beach, Zeus felt his heart throb wildly once again. She was a princess, the daughter of a king from the shores of Asia. How should he approach her? She was leading her flock out to pasture. Zeus took on the form of a bull. A dazzling bull with a snowy white coat and sinewy neck muscles, outfitted with horns that were more diaphanous than a diamond of pure water. It was such a gorgeous animal that the beautiful maiden drew closer in order to stroke it. The bull gently lay his warm muzzle on her breast and then knelt down at her feet. The princess thus grew bolder. In spite of the protests of her servants, she climbed onto the animal's back. It immediately jumped to its feet and rushed toward the shore. It galloped swiftly over the sea and took the unfortunate maiden all the way to Crete. Once there, Zeus changed back into human form and then satisfied his desire. The princess from Asia who would live here in Crete from now on was named Europa. To thank the animal that had enabled him to abduct the princess, Zeus placed the bull up among the stars. Keep your eyes on the sky. Not too far away from here is the Big Dipper. Its real name is Callisto. In Greek, Callisto means the most beautiful. It is therefore hardly surprising that Zeus fell head over heels for this nymph. There was just one thing. She was one of the servants of the goddess Artemis. Artemis was the goddess of hunting. She was also the goddess of virginity. Callisto had thus taken a vow of chastity. No man was allowed to get near her or her companions, who were all virgin huntresses. The last man who transgressed the rule was a hunter named Actaeon, and he was punished in a most dreadful way. Artemis changed him into a stag who was devoured by his own hounds. Zeus was well aware of the danger. He wondered how he could get around it. Who would Callisto trust without any suspicion whatsoever? But as she served, of course, Artemis herself. So he approached his heart's desire disguised as the divine huntress. And there he was, or rather, she. What Callisto saw was her mistress, who was making eyes at her.